And let's see. Hello, everyone. Welcome, welcome one and all. Please stand by. I'm just getting getting OBS working as I hope, as I envision, as I picture. Yes. All right. Working out the kinks. Hi, everyone. Wow. All kinds of you here today. Thank you. Thank you all for being part of my stream. I have a very influential letter from MLK Jr. that I'm going to read. It's called Letter from Birmingham Jail by Martin Luther King Jr. And I have never read it in its entirety before. However, it was thrust into my world last year when I heard Tom Hartman reading it on his radio program. If anyone doesn't know who Tom Hartman is, I highly recommend dialing in to his radio show. He has a national radio show. It's on YouTube too. He streams it live from noon Eastern Time for 3 hours. And he is my political talk radio daddy. I learned a tremendous amount from Tom Hartman. And he blessed us as his guests, as his audience last year with this speech. So, because we are celebrating MLK States and hopefully around the world, I'm going to endeavor to read a very profoundly moving speech that I think is absolutely relevant still today, especially when you replace some of the struggles that he was dealing with in the 60s with the struggles that we will forever be dealing with in this modern class warfare that we are all engaged in. I will be taking breaks from time to time to talk with the audience and catch my breath, because reading 6 pages, very dense pages, is demanding of my oxygen supply. So I have Chelsea, my favorite co-host, to help moderate the chat, maybe start some polls, ask some questions, and interrupt me from time to time to ask some audience questions or share some audience thoughts. So, without further ado, hello Chelsea, welcome. Are you ready to start?
Yeah, let's do this. If you're in here, start tapping the screen so we can get more views. The more likes, the more views.
Yes, thank you. More likes means more eyeballs. So thank you all for participating. I wish I knew all the details on the backstory of why MLK Jr. landed in the Birmingham Jail. Maybe we'll talk about that later. But it's easy to say that he was arrested for demonstrating peacefully. And we're going to find out why in the letter.
Speak slow so they have
Yes.
to listen.
I'm trying to channel my inner Barack Obama, Nelson Mandela, and MLK speaking voice. From the Birmingham jail, where he was imprisoned as a participant in nonviolent demonstrations against segregation, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. wrote in longhand the letter from which follows. It was his response to a public statement of concern and caution issued by 8 white religious leaders from the South. Dr. King, who was born in 1929, did his undergraduate work at Morehouse College, attended the integrated Crozer Theological Seminary in Chester, Pennsylvania, one of 6 black pupils among 100 students and the president of his class, and won a fellowship to Boston University for his PhD. That's the preface to the letter. And he writes, while confined here in the Birmingham City Jail, I come across your recent statement calling our present activities unwise and untimely. Seldom, if ever, do I pause to answer criticism of my work and ideas. If I sought to answer all of the criticism that crosses my desk, my secretaries would be engaged in little less in the course of the day, and I would have no time for constructive work. But since I feel that you are men of genuine goodwill and your criticisms are sincerely set forth, I would like to answer your statement in what I hope will be patient and reasonable terms. I think I should give the reason for my being in Birmingham, since you have been influenced by the arguments of outsiders coming in. I have the honor of serving as president of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, an organization operating in every southern state with headquarters in Atlanta, Georgia. We have some 85 affiliate organizations all across the South, one being the Alabama Christian Movement for Human Rights. Whenever necessary and possible, we share staff, educational and financial resources with our affiliates. Several months ago, our local affiliate here in Birmingham invited us to be on call to engage in a nonviolent direct action program, if such were deemed necessary. We readily consented, and when the hour came, we lived up to our promises. So, I am here, along with several members of the staff, because we are invited here. I am here because I have a basic organization's ties here. A quick pause to mention that I'm going to have to censor a lot of the words because we are on TikTok. And I would also like to remind people that when he uses the N-word, sometimes he refers to it in the negative attack, the derogatory sense, but often he uses it in a brotherhood sense. When he talks about the N-word, as in the brotherhood, that can be kind of confusing. So I urge everyone to read this speech for themselves or open it up and read along with me. Beyond this, I am a man in Birmingham because injustice is here. Just as the 8th century prophets left their little villages and carried their "Thus saith the Lord" far beyond the boundaries of their hometowns, and just as the Apostle Paul left his little village of Tarsus and carried the gospel of Jesus Christ to practically every hamlet and city of the Greco-Roman world, I too am compelled to carry the gospel of freedom beyond my particular hometown. Like Paul, I must constantly respond to the Macedonian call for aid. Moreover, I am cognizant of the interrelatedness of all communities and states. I cannot sit idly by in Atlanta and not be concerned about what happens in Birmingham. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all, indirectly. Never again can we afford to live with the narrow, provincial, outsider agitator idea. Everyone who lives inside the United States can never be considered an outsider. You deplore the demonstrations that are presently taking place in Birmingham, but I am sorry that your statements did not express a similar concern for the conditions that brought the demonstrations into being. I am sure that each of you would want to go beyond the superficial social analyst who looks merely at effects and does not grapple with the underlying causes. I would not hesitate to say that it is unfortunate that so-called demonstrations are taking place in Birmingham at the same time. But I would say in more empathetic terms that it is even more unfortunate that the white power structure of this city left the N-word community with no other alternative. In any nonviolent campaign, there are 4 basic steps: collection of the facts to determine whether injustices are alive, negotiations, self-purification, and direct action. We have gone through all of these steps in Birmingham. There can be no gainsaying of the fact that racial injustice engulfs this community. Birmingham is probably the most thoroughly segregated city in the United States. Its ugly record of police brutality is known in every section of the country. Its unjust treatment of the N-words in the courts is a notorious reality. There have been more unsolved bombings of N-word homes and churches in Birmingham than any other city in the nation. These are the hard, brutal, and unbelievable facts. On the basis of them, N-word leaders sought to negotiate with the city fathers, but the political leaders consistently refused to engage in good faith negotiations. Then came the opportunity last September to talk with some of the leaders of the economic community. In these negotiation sessions, certain promises were made by the merchants, such as the promise to remove humiliating racial signs from the stores. On the basis of these promises, Reverend Shuttlesworth and the leaders of the Alabama Christian movement of human rights agreed to call a moratorium on any demonstration. As the weeks and months unfolded, we recognized that we were the victims of a broken promise. The signs remained, and as in so many experiences of the past, we were confronted with the blasted hopes that the dark shadow of a deep disappointment settled upon us. So we had no alternatives except that of preparing for direct action, whereby we would present our very bodies as the means of laying our case before the conscience of the local and national community. We were not unmindful of the difficulties involved, so we decided to go through a process of self-purification. We started having workshops on nonviolence and repeatedly asked ourselves the question, are you able to accept blows without retaliating? And the question, are you able to endure the ordeals of jail? We decided to set our direct action program around the Easter season, realizing that with exception of Christmas, this was the largest shopping period of the year, knowing that a strong economic withdrawal program would be the byproduct of direct action. We felt that this was the best time to bring pressure on the merchants of the needed changes. Then it occurred to us that the March election was ahead. And so we speedily decided to postpone action until after Election Day. Then we discovered that Mr. Connor was in the runoff. We decided again to postpone action so that the demonstrations could not be used to cloud the issues. At this time, we agreed to begin our nonviolent witness the day after the runoff. Do you see how important it is to coordinate action with political movements and socioeconomic moments in history? The idea was to have a direct action to affect the merchants at the time that were still segregating by signs who can drink from which fountain and use which bathroom. This reveals that we did not move irresponsibly into direct action. We too wanted to see Mr. Connor defeated, so we went through postponement after postponement to aid in the community need. After this, we felt the direct action could be delayed no longer. You may well ask, why direct action? Why sit-ins, marches, and so forth? Isn't negotiation a better path? You are exactly right in your call for negotiation. Indeed, this is the purpose of direct action. Nonviolent direct action seeks to create such a crisis that establish such creative tension that a community that is consistently confused that has consistently refused to negotiate is forced to confront the issue. It seeks so to dramatize the issue so that it can no longer be ignored. I just referred to the action of tension as a part of the network of nonviolent resistor. This
All
may
right, deep
sound
breath.
rather
Hold on.
shocking. Yes.
All right, so I want to talk about how important it is to remember that there are schools that are trying to ban things like this. Ban these letters, ban these speeches, ban books that mention these things. There are whole states where Martin Luther King has his there's pieces and parts of Martin Luther King's doctrine that have been written into law because of the way that he spoke. It has been put to paper, and there are politicians that are purposely removing things like Martin Luther King from history.
There's a concerted effort to label our dirty history as just woke liberalism or the new, what do they call it, the buzzword, critical race theory. Well, you're not teaching critical race theory to my middle schooler. Well, no kidding, because it's a college level course. But I digress. This is how the right packages social issues as if it's going to make your child worse off, when we should be embracing these types of history lessons. And that's why we're here today.
What happens if we don't learn from history, Brian?
We are doomed to repeat it. And
Doesn't that hurt
also,
you? Like
remember
that saying legitimately hurts my soul.
remember that history doesn't necessarily repeat, but it definitely rhymes. This may sound rather shocking, but I must confess that I am not afraid of the word tension. I have earnestly worked and preached against violent tension, but there is a type of constructive nonviolent tension that is necessary for growth. Just as Socrates felt that it was necessary to create a tension in the mind so that individuals could rise from the bondage of myth and half-truths to the unfettered realm of creative analysis and objective appraisal, we must see the need for having nonviolent gadflies to create the kind of tension in society that will help men to rise from the dark depths of prejudice and racism to the majestic heights of the understanding and brotherhood. So the purpose of direct action is to create a situation so crisis-packed that it will inevitably open the door to negotiation. We therefore concur with you in your call for negotiation. Too long has our beloved Southern, too long has our beloved Southland been bogged down in the tragic attempts to dive in monologues rather than dialogues. One of the basic points in your statement is that our acts are untimely. Some have asked, why did you give the new administration time to act? The only answer that I can give to this inquiry is that the new administration must be prepared about as much as the outgoing one before it acts. I'm going to say that again. We will be sadly mistaken if we feel that the election of Mr. Boutwell will bring the millennium to Birmingham. While Mr. Boutwell is much more articulate and gentle than Mr. Connor, they are both segregationists, dedicated to the task of maintaining the status quo. The hope I see in Mr. Boutwell is that he will be reasonable enough to see the futility of massive resistance to desegregation. But he will not see, I'm sorry, there's a lot of words here. But he will not see this without pressure from the devotees of civil rights. My friends, I must say to you that we have not made a single gain in civil rights without determined legal and nonviolent pressure. History is the long and tragic story of the fact that privileged groups seldom give up the privileges voluntarily.
Hey, Brian.
Individuals One sec. Individuals may see the moral light and voluntarily give up this unjust pressure. But as Reinhold Niebuhr has reminded us, groups are more immortal than individuals. Yes, Chelsea.
Stop apologizing for being a human that has to breathe.
I too have to breathe
Stop
and drink Earl
apologizing, my
Grey
friend.
tea.
And drink Earl Grey tea. Facts, my friend. Facts.
I just want to get to Star Trek. I want to speak into a replicator and say, Earl Grey, hot. And then it appears in my hand.
That doesn't happen for you?
In a hand-fashioned dragonfly mug.
And oh, that's you want. Okay, you're getting awfully specific. This replicator
Mm.
is going to be like this. Bitch is bougie.
We know through painful experience that freedom is never voluntarily given by the oppressor. It must be demanded by the oppressed. Frankly, I have never yet engaged in a direct action movement that was well timed. According to the he used well time in quotation marks. This reminds me a little bit of the history of why he wrote this letter. This was in response to, I believe, in part, all of the damning letters in the newspaper in Birmingham and around the country at a time by the white authors and white paper owners and editors and the officials who were condemning Martin Luther King Jr. for these actions. So this letter is in response to those ideas at the time. And I think this part of the letter is in perfect symmetry with the struggles that we're experiencing today. So it is literally putting our bodies on the wheels and the levers of the gears of oppression, of the oppressors. We are, remember people, we are in a class war. We know through painful, I'm going to repeat this because it is so profound. We know through painful experience that freedom is never voluntarily given by the oppressor. It must be demanded by the oppressed. Frankly, I have never yet engaged in a direct action movement that was well timed, according to the timetable of those who have not suffered unduly from the disease of segregation. For years now, I have heard the words, wait. It rings in the ear of every N-word with a piercing familiarity. This wait that has almost always never come and has been traumatizing. And then here's a word I've never said before. Thalidomide. Thalidomide. I'm sorry. I should have read this all before I went live, but I didn't. Thalidomide. Okay. It has never been a traumatizing thalidomide, revealing the emotional stress for a moment, only to give birth to an ill-formed infant in frustration. We must come to see with the distinguished jurist of yesterday that justice too long delayed is justice denied. We have we have waited for more than 340 years for our God-given and constitutional rights. The nations of Asia and Africa are moving with jet-like speed towards goals of political independence, and we still creep a horse and buggy pace towards the gaining of a cup of coffee at a lunch counter. I guess it is easy for those who have never felt the struggle, darts of segregation to say, wait. But when have you seen vicious mobs put to death through a particular method that I don't know I can say on TikTok? But when have you seen vicious mobs
You
unalive
definitely can't
your
say that.
neighbors and fathers at will and drown your sisters and brothers at whim? When have you seen hate-filled policemen curse, kick, brutalize, and even unalive your black brothers and sisters with impunity? When you see the vast majority of your 20 million N-words brothers smothering in an airtight cage of poverty in the midst of an affluent society, when you suddenly find your tongue twisted and your speech stammering as you seek to explain your 6-year-old daughter why she cannot go to the public amusement park and that has just been advertised on television, and see tears welling up in their eyes, for she sees for she is told that fountain is for she is told that fountain is closed to colored children, and see the desperate clouds of inferiority begin to form in her little mental sky, and see her begin to distort her little personality by unconsciously developing a bitterness towards the white people. When you have to concoct an answer to your 5-year-old son asking in agonizing pathos, "Daddy, why do white people treat color people so mean?" When you take the cross-country drive and find in and when you find it necessary to sleep after the night in the uncomfortable corners of your automobile because no motel will accept you, when you are humiliated day in and day out by the nagging signs reading whites and colored when your first name becomes N-word and your middle name becomes boy, however old you are, and your last names become John, and when your wife and mother are never given the respected title Mrs., when you are harried day and harried by day and haunted by night by the fact that you are a N-word, living constantly at tiptoe stance, never knowing what to expect next, and plagues with inner fears and outer resentments, when you are forever fighting a degrading sense of nobodiness, then you will understand why we find it difficult to wait. There comes a time when a cup of endurance runs over and men are no longer willing to be plunged into an abyss of injustice, that they experience the blackness of corroding despair. I hope, sirs, that you can understand our legitimate and unavoidable impatience. You express a great deal of anxiety over our willingness to break laws. This is certainly a legitimate concern, since we so diligently urge people to obey the Supreme Court's decision of 1954, outlawing segregation in the public schools. It is rather strange and paradoxical to find us consciously breaking laws. One may well ask, quote, how can you advocate breaking someone's law and obeying others? End quote. The answer is found in the fact that there are two types of laws. There are just laws and there are unjust laws. I would agree with St. Augustine that, quote, an unjust law is no law at all. Now, what is the difference between the two? How does one determine when a law is just or unjust? A just law is a man-made code that squares with the moral law, or a law of God. An unjust law is a code that is out of harmony with the moral law. To put it in terms of St. Thomas Aquinas, an unjust law is a human law that is not rooted in eternal and natural law. Any law that uplifts human personality is just. Any law that degrades human personality is unjust. All segregation statutes are unjust because segregation distorts the soul and damages personality. It gives the segregator a false sense of superiority, and the segregated a false sense of inferiority. To use the words of Martin Buber, B-U-B-E-R, to use the words of Martin Buber, the great Jewish philosopher, segregation's subtitles and, quote, I in a relationship for the I, thou, end quote, relationship and, this is a hard sentence to read. The great Jewish philosopher segregation substitutes an I, it relationships for I, thou. You really need to read it. It's hard to speak. So segregation is not only politically, economically, and sociologically unsound, but it is morally wrong and sinful. Paul Tillich has said that sin is the separation. Isn't segregation and existential expression of man's tragic separation an expression of his awful statements, his subtle sinfulness? So I can urge men to obey in the 1954 decision of the Supreme Court because it is morally right, and I encourage them to disobey segregation ordinance. Let us turn to a more concrete example of just and unjust laws. An unjust law is a code that a majority inflicts on a minority, that it is not binding on itself, that it is different. I'm sorry, everyone. The bright white screen background is harsh on the eyes sometimes. An unjust law is a code that a majority inflicts on a minority, that is not binding on itself. This is the difference made legal. On the other hand, a just law is a code that majority compels a minority to follow, and that it is willing to follow itself. This is sameness made legal. Let me give another explanation. An unjust law is a code inflicted upon a minority which that minority has no part in enacting or creating because it did not have the unhampered rights to vote. Who can say that the legislature of Alabama, which set up the segregation laws, was democratically elected? Throughout the state of Alabama, all types of conniving methods are used to prevent N-words from becoming registered voters. And there are some counties, without a single N-word registered to vote, despite the fact that the N-words constitute a majority of the population. Can any law set up in such a state be considered democratically structured? These laws just These are just a few examples of unjust laws. There are some instances of laws that is just in the face and unjust on application. For instance, I was arrested Friday on a charge of parading without a permit. Now, there is nothing wrong with the ordinance which requires a permit of a parade, but when the ordinance is used to prevent segregation and to not deny citizens the First Amendment privilege of peaceful assembly and peaceful protest, then it becomes unjust. Of course, there is nothing new about this kind of civil disobedience. It was seen sublimely in the refusal of Sadark, Mesark, and Abednego, who obey the laws of Nebuchadnezzar, because a higher moral law was involved. It was practiced superbly by the early Christians who were willing to face hungry lions and the excruciating pain of chopping blocks before submitting to certain unjust laws of the Roman Empire. To a degree, academic freedom is a reality today because Socrates practiced civil disobedience. We can never forget that everything Hitler did in Germany was legal, and everything the Hungarian freedom fighters did in Hungary was illegal. It was illegal to aid the comfort of a Jew in Hitler's Germany. But I am sure that if I had lived in Germany during the time, I would have aided and comforted my Jewish brothers, even though it was illegal. If I lived in a communist country today where certain principles dear to the Christian faith are suppressed, I believe I would openly advocate disobeying these anti-religious laws. I must make two honest confessions to you, my Christian and Jewish brothers. First, I must confess that over the last few years I have been gravely disappointed with the white moderate. I have almost reached the regrettable conclusion that the N-word's greatest stumbling block is the stride towards freedom. It is not that, but it is the white citizen counselor of the, I don't know if I can say the shmoo schmucks schman, but the white moderate who is more devoted to order than to justice, who prefers a negative peace, which is the absence of tension, to positive peace, which is the presence of justice, who constantly says, quote, I agree with you in the goal you seek, but I can't agree on your methods of direct action. End quote. Who painstakingly feels that he can set the timetable for another man's freedom? Who lives by the myth of time, and who constantly advises the N-words to wait until a, quote, more convenient season, end quote. Shallow understanding from people of good will is more frustrating than absolute misunderstanding from people of ill will. Lukewarm acceptance is much more bewildering than outright rejection. In your statement, you asserted that your actions, even though peaceful, must be condemned because Precipitative. In your statement you asserted that your actions, even though peaceful, must be condemned because they precipitated violence. But can this assertion be logically made? Isn't this like condemning the robbed man because his possessions of money precipitated the evil acts of robbery? Isn't this like condemning Socrates because his unwavering commitment to truth and his philosophical delvings precipitated the misguided popular minds to make him drink the hemlock? Isn't this like condemning Jesus because his unique God consciousness and never ceasing devoted to his will precipitated the evil act of crucifixion? We must come to see, as federal courts have consistently affirmed, that it is immoral to argue an individual to withdraw his efforts to gain his basic constitutional rights, because the quest precipitates violence. Society must protect the robbed and punish the robber. Oh my goodness. We are on page 4 of 6. Going to take a quick break. Chelsea has fallen out of the box, bringing her in.
I got sucked out.
Yes, I see that. Yeah.
Also, we had a considerable drop once the use of the dialect
That's okay.
N-word
That's
began
okay.
to
I want
arise.
to continue the live. I am recording. I will put it up on YouTube after. So I will restart the live after I finish. Just 2 pages left to go, and then we can have a discussion about it. The fans who are here to stay, they'll find their way back.
Oh, I agree.
Okay, continuing. I had also hoped that the white moderate would reject the myth of time. I received a letter this morning from a white brother in Texas which said, quote, "All Christians know that the colored people will receive equal rights eventually, but it is possible that you are in too great of a religious hurry. It has taken Christianity almost 2,000 years to accomplish what it has. The teachings of Christ take time to come to earth." End quote. All that is said here grows out of a tragic misconception of time. It is the strangely irrational notion that there is something in the very flow of time that will inevitably cure all ills. Actually, time is neutral. It comes to us either destructively or constructively. I am coming to feel that the people of ill will have used time much more effectively than the people of good will. We will have to repent in the generation, not merely for the vitriolic words and actions of the bad people, but for the appalling silence of the good people. We must come to see the human progress never rolls in on wheels of inevitability. It comes through the tireless efforts and persistent work of men willing to be co-workers with God. And without this hard work, time itself becomes an ally of the forces of social stagnation. You spoke of your activity in Birmingham as extreme. At first, I was rather disappointed that fellow clergymen would see my nonviolent. Ooh, I need to breathe. I just got dizzy.
And meditation, breathing, go. Deep breath in, ramen. Deep breath out, languine.
Some would say I am experiencing a moment of God,
Stop.
but I would say it's a lack of oxygen in the old noodle.
Read
Any
slower.
any guests want to just talk or chat for a moment while I take a minute and breathe? Please come in. Request now or forever hold your peace.
Ramen. Can you imagine knowing the gravity of what you're doing and knowing that the rest of the world is far more advanced than America? Seeing the missteps, seeing the mistakes. Because I feel like we're still living it. I feel like we are still living in that misstep that religion has. Women are not seen as second class citizens, where there is not a pay gap, there is not a pink tax, there is not rights being taken away purely based on the way that you were born. It's ludicrous to me that this country is so large and claims to be so great, and yet seems to be so blind to its atrocities and horrors. How can we not see the rest of the world's beautiful reflection of their triumphs and their goals and the successes that they are reaching, and seeing how far we have fallen from that? Like he is literally speaking to this then on how the rest of the world in that time was not this way. This was happening in America. I mean, it was happening in Africa and it was happening in other places too, but it wasn't happening everywhere. And they knew this. And they could see that there was a place where there was a better life. It didn't have to be this way.
It didn't have to be this way. And here we are, still fighting.
It baffles my mind that the people who truly think that they're in charge wish to erase this part of history. Wish to take away the successes of these magnificent people who put their lives on the line because they wanted, like, respect for them and their children and their children's children.
I picture the fire hoses and the dogs
Right?
and the canes and the bloodied faces and broken fingers
All I
and
can
cracked
think of
skulls
all I
for,
can
for
think of is the the bottles being thrown at buses as they were driving. Just like the the buses being attacked and thrown, like glass bottles being thrown through windows,
okay,
flaming
we have to
bottles.
stop. I'm going to start crying.
I know.
Please pause.
What would you think if you saw America today? Do you think you'd be greatly disappointed?
I can't think of it right now. I want to read the speech. We're on page
So
4
sorry.
of 6. You spoke of your action in You spoke of our action in Birmingham as extreme. At first, I was rather disappointed that fellow clergymen would see my non-violent efforts as those of an extremist. I started thinking about the fact that I stand in the middle of two opposing forces in the N-word community. One is a force. He's talking about his fellow N-word clergymen who were endeavoring to silence MLK and everyone in the action. They spoke out against civil disobedience. So this letter is to them. One is a force of complacency made up by N-words who, as a result of long years of and a sense of, quote, somebodyness, that they have adjusted to segregation. And on the other hand, of a few N-words in the middle class who, because of a degree of academic and economic security, and because at points they profit by segregation, have unconsciously become insensitive to the problems of the masses. The other force is one of bitterness and hatred, and comes perilously close to advocating violence. It is expressed in the various that are springing up over the nation, the largest and best known being Elijah Muhammad's Muslim movement. This movement is nourished by the contemporary frustration over the continued existence of racial discrimination. It is made up of people who have lost faith in America, who have absolutely I'm sorry to interrupt, but we just watched a movie last night. Chelsea, what was the name of it? And it ties in directly to the loss of faith in America and the terrorist, I don't know if I can say the T-word acts. I don't really recommend it, but it is a little highlight. It's a a snapshot of I don't know. I'm sorry to interrupt. I digress. Squirrel. How to ruin a perfectly good speech by a very flawed movie.
The most flawed movie. It was terrible.
It was terrible.
Hold on, I'm gonna look it up. Hold on. It wasn't good. I didn't keep it in my memory.
The largest and best known being the Elijah Muhammad's Muslim movement. This movement is nourished by the contemporary frustration over the continued existence of racial discrimination. It is made up of people who have lost faith in America, who have absolutely repudiated Christianity, and who have concluded that the white man is an incurable devil. I have tried to stand between these two forces, saying that we need not follow the do-nothingism of the complacent or the hatred and despair of the black nationalist. There is a more excellent way of love and nonviolent protest. I'm grateful to God that through the N-word church, the Diminison, D-I-M-E-N-S-I-O-N, dimension. Yes, very basic words can sometimes appear alien. Dimension.
You may need more oxygen, my friend.
I definitely need more oxygen.
It's the Interceptor, by the way. Interceptor? Yeah.
Thank you.
Interceptor.
Yeah, don't watch it. It's not good. But it is a snapshot of what we were just reading. I need oxygen.
Please stand by for a brief commercial break.
Yes, biological and technical difficulties.
Go ahead, tell me humans are perfect.
Okay.
Better?
I hope so. There is a more excellent way of love and nonviolent protest. I'm grateful to God that through the N-word church, the dimension of nonviolence entered our struggle. If this philosophy had not emerged, I am convinced that my now many streets of the South would be flowing with floods of blood. I am not further convinced that if our white brothers, dismissed as rabble-rousers and outside agitators, those of us who are working through the channels of nonviolence direct action and refuse to support our nonviolent efforts, millions of N-words out of frustration and despair will seek solace and security in black nationalist ideologies and a development that will lead inevitably to a frightening. This is what happens to the American N-word. Something within has reminded him of his birthright of freedom. Something without has reminded him that he can gain it consciously and unconsciously, and his brown and yellow brothers of Asia, South America, and the Caribbean. He is moving with a sense of cosmic urgency towards the promised land of racial justice, recognizing this vital urge that has engulfed the N-word community. One should readily understand public demonstrations. The N-word has many pent-up resentments and latent frustrations. I'm sorry, everyone. Please read this for yourself at your own speed. I should have prepped a little better, but I am, after all, only human. The N-word has many pent-up resentments and latent frustrations. He has to get them out, so let him march sometime. Let him have his prayer pilgrimages to the city hall. Understand why he must have sit-ins and freedom rides. If his repressed emotions do not come out in these non-violent ways, they will come out in enormous expressions of violence. This is not a threat. This is a fact of history. So I have not said to my people, quote, "Get rid of your discontent," end quote. But I have tried to say that this normal and healthy discontent can be channeled through the creative outlet of nonviolent direct action. Now this approach is being dismissed as extreme. I must admit that I was initially disappointed in being so categorized. But as I continue to think about this letter, I gradually gain a bit of satisfaction from the being considered an extremist. As what not Jesus, an extremist in love? Did your enemies bless the curse? Bleh, bleh. Breathe, breath.
How dare you need oxygen, sir? The audacity of you and your lungs and brain.
One day, I hope to have a volunteer editor to edit all of these parts out. Wouldn't that be nice?
Don't.
I don't have the time to edit. I don't enjoy it enough to make it a hobby.
You know, I love editing.
But that's what TikTok Lives are for. And we have 21 guests for now. Thank you all for being here. TikTok is revolutionary in some ways, and I never want to lose that credit. I never want to forget to give it credit for revolutionizing a form of multimedia, despite all of its flaws and shortcomings. And we can talk about those later. Okay, we're finishing up page 4, and there's only 6 pages. But as I continued to think about this letter, I gradually gained a bit of satisfaction from being considered an extremist. Was not Jesus an extremist in love? Love your enemies, bless them and curse you. Bless them that curse you. Pray for them that despitefully use you. End quote. Was not Amos an extremist for justice? Quote, let justice roll down like water and righteousness like a mighty stream. End quote. Was not Paul an extremist for the gospel of Jesus Christ? Quote, I bear in my body the mark of the Lord Jesus. End quote. Was not Martin Luther an extremist? Quote, here I stand, I can do no other, so help me God. End quote. Was not John Bunyan an extremist? Quote, I will stay in jail to the end of my days before I make a mockery of my conscience. I love that one.
I haven't decided whether or not I'm going to fight you.
Was not Abraham Lincoln an extremist? Quote, this nation cannot survive half slave and half free. Was not Thomas Jefferson an extremist? We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal. So the quote, the question is not whether we will be extremists, but what kind of extremists we will be. Will we be extremists for hate, or will we be extremists for love? Will we be extremists for the preservation of injustice, or will we be extremists for the case or cause of justice? I had hoped that the white moderate would see this. Maybe I was too optimistic. Maybe I expected too much. I guess I should have realized that few members of a race that have oppressed another race can understand or appreciate the deep groans and passionate yearnings of those that have been oppressed, and still fewer have the vision to see that injustice must be rooted out by the strong, persistent, and determined action. I am thankful, however, that some of our white brothers have grasped the meaning of this social revolution, and committed themselves to it, that they still they are still all too small in quantity, but they are big in quality. Some, like Ralph McDabbs, have written about our struggle in eloquent, prophetic, and understanding terms. Others have marched with us down nameless streets of the South rides. They have languished in filthy roach-infested jails, suffered the abuse and brutality of angry policemen who have seen as dirty N-word lovers. They, unlike many of their moderate brothers, have recognized the urgency of the moment and sensed the need for powerful action, antidotes to combat the disease of segregation. Let me rush on to you to mention my other disappointment. Let me rush on to mention my other disappointment. I have been disappointed with the white church and its leadership. Of course, there are some notable exceptions. I am not unmindful of the fact that each of you have taken some significant stands in this issue. I commend you, Reverend Stallings, for your Christian stand this past Sunday in welcoming N-words to your Baptist church without service in a non-segregated bias. I commend the Catholic leaders for the state of integrating Springle College several years ago. But despite these notable exceptions, I must honestly reiterate that I have been disappointed with the Church. I do not say that as one of those negative critics who have always find I must honestly reiterate what I have been disappointed in with the Church. I do not say that as one of those negative critics who can always find something wrong with the Church. I say it as a minister of the gospel who loves the Church, who has nurtured in his bosom, who has been sustained by its spiritual blessings, and who will remain true to it as long as the cord of life shall lengthen. I had the strange feeling when I was suddenly catapulted into the leadership of the bus protest in Montgomery several years ago, when we would have the support of the white church. I felt that the white ministers, priests, and rabbis of the South would be some of our strongest. Some few have been outright opponents, refusing to understand the freedom movement and misrepresenting its leader. All too many others. All
And
too many.
breathe.
Yes, and breathe. All too many others have been more cautious than courageous and have remained silent behind the anesthetizing security of stained glass windows. In spite of my shattered dreams of the past, I came to Birmingham with the hope that the white religious leadership of this community should see the justice of our cause and with deep moral concern serve as the channel through which our just grievances could get to the power structure. I had hoped that each of you would understand, but again, I have been disappointed. I have heard numerous religious leaders of the South call upon their worshippers to comply with desegregation decisions because it is the law. But I have longed to hear white ministers say, follow the decree because integration is morally right and the N-word is your brother. In the midst of blatant injustices, influenced upon the N-word. I have watched white churches stand on the sidelines and merely mouth pious irrelevancies and sanctimonious trivialities in the midst of a mighty struggle to rid our nation of racial and economic injustice. I have heard so many ministers say those are social issues which the gospel has nothing to do with. And I have, end quote. And I have watched so many churches commit themselves to a completely overworldly religion which made a struggle a strange distinction between body and soul, the sacred and the secular.
All right, first off, end quote.
End quote.
I
What a
will.
poet.
I'm going to fight you.
You're gonna fight me? Okay,
Yeah.
later. We're on page 5.
Only because of the end quote. Every time you say end quote, it hurts my feelings just a little.
Oh, yes. Inside joke. We're not going to talk about that now.
Deep
We are
breath.
breathing.
Do you know that laughter is good for bringing in oxygen?
Yes.
Okay, so
End
breathe,
quote.
damn it. So breathe, damn it.
Who knew that breathing could cause brain damage?
You mean lack of?
I literally feel my fingers and toes tingling.
Dude, okay, so we're gonna stop breathing for a moment before Brian has a stroke. Jesus.
But I'm so close.
No, okay. I'm sorry. No? Do like jumping jacks or talking, just do it. So, if anybody would like to come in, this is a perfect time if you would like to discuss what we're reading today. This is a good moment before Brian passes out.
Can you see my new plants? I have a ZZ plant in my room.
I can see your plant. It's really pretty. Don't hit the lamp. Okay, that I can see.
My mother has so many plants in her house. It's a bit of a nursery, and I wanted one of these. She has 5 or 6. It is a low light, low water plant, which makes it perfect for my low water, low light room. And I think it's fantastic. I love it. Nice thick leaves. It holds all of its moisture in the trunk. You can't really, it's got these thick, hard trunks that it stores its moisture in.
See, you did a thing. Now I want to take a leaf and put it underneath the microscope. See? You did a thing. Someone says, I like the look of your room. Classy.
Yep. It is antique.
Very.
But it's fine. I don't hate the wallpaper. I actually quite like the pattern, the floral pattern. But if I were picking out wallpaper today, I wouldn't.
You mean you wouldn't choose wallpaper? Weird.
Okay.
Please tell me your fingers and toes are no longer tingling.
They are no longer tingling.
All right.
I'm also getting quite hungry. My blood sugar is getting low. But we're so close. And I don't want to start burping on camera.
How much is left? A page, you said?
Not much. Wherever the early Christians entered a town, the power structure got disturbed and immediately sought to convict them for being disturbers of the peace and outside agitators. But they went on with the conviction that they were, quote, a colony of heaven, end quote, and had to obey God rather than man. They were small in number, but big in commitment. They were to God intoxicated. They were too God intoxicated to be astronomically intimidated. They brought an end to such ancient evils as infanticide, infanticide. Please, everyone, read the paper for yourself. Contest. Ah, my goodness. That is a hard one. They were small in number, but big in commitment. They were too God intoxicated to be astronomically intimidated. They brought an end to such ancient evils as infanticide and gladiatorial contest. Ah, there we go. Things are different now. The contemporary church is so often a weak, ineffectual voice with an uncertain sound. It is so often the arch supporter of the status quo. Far from being disturbed by the presence of the church, the power structure of the average community is consoled by the church's often vocal sanctions of things as they are. But the judgment of God is upon the church as never before. If the church of today does not recapture the sacrificial spirit of the early church, it will lose its authentic ring, forfeit the loyalty of millions, and be dismissed as an irrelevant social club with no meaning for the 20th century. I meet young people every day whose disappointment with the church has risen to outright disgust. I hope the church as a whole will meet the challenge of this decisive hour. But even if the church does not come to the aid of justice, I have no despair about the future. I have no fear about the outcome of our struggle in Birmingham. Even if our motives are presently misunderstood, we will reach the goal of freedom in Birmingham and all over the nation. Because the goal of America is freedom, absurd and scorned though we may be, our destiny is tied up with the destiny of America. Before the Pilgrims landed at Plymouth, we were here. Before the pen of Jefferson scratched across the pages of history the majestic word of the Declaration of Independence, we were here. For more than 2 centuries our foreparents labored here without wages. They made cotton kings, and they built the homes of the masters in the midst of brutal injustice and shameful humiliation. And yet, if the inexpressible cruelties of slavery could not stop us, the oppression we now face will surely fail. We still win our freedom because the sacred heritage of our nation and the eternal will of God are embodied in our echoing demands. I must close now. But before closing, I am impelled I am impelled to mention one other point in your statement that troubled me profoundly. You warmly commended the Birmingham police force for keeping order and preventing violence. I don't believe you would have so warmly commended the police force if you had seen its angry, violent dogs literally biting 6 unarmed, non-violent N-words. I don't believe you would so quickly commend the police if you would observe their ugly and inhuman treatment of the N-words here in the city jail, if you would watch them push and curse old N-word women and young N-word girls, if you would see them slap and kick old N-word men and young boys, if you would observe them as they did on two occasions, refuse to give us food because we wanted to sing our grace together. That I cannot join you in your praise of the police department. It is true that they have been rather disciplined in their public handling of the demonstrators. In this sense, they have been publicly non-violent, but for what purpose? To preserve the evil system of segregation. Over the last few years, I have consistently preached that non-violence demands that the means we use must be as pure as the ends we seek. So I have tried to make it clear that it is wrong to use immoral means to attain moral ends. But now I must affirm that it is just as wrong, or even more, to use moral means to preserve immoral ends. I wish you had commended the N-word demonstrators of Birmingham for their sublime courage, their willingness to suffer, and their amazing discipline in the midst of the most inhuman provocation. One day the South will recognize its real heroes. They will be the names of James Meredith, courageously and with a majestic sense of purpose, facing jeering and hostile mobs and the agonizing loneliness that characterizes the life of the pioneer. They will be old, oppressed, battered N-word women, symbolized in a 72-year-old woman of Montgomery, Alabama, who rose up in a sense of dignity, and with her people descended not to ride the segregated buses, and responded to one who inquired about their tiredness with ungrammatical profundity. Quote, "My feet is tired, but my soul is rested." End quote. They will be young high school and college students, young ministers of the gospel, and a host of their elders, courageously and non-violently sitting at the lunch counters and willingly going to jail for conscience's sake. One day the South will know that when these disinherited children of God sat down at lunch counters, they were in reality standing up for the best of the American dream and that the most sacred values of our Judeo-Christian heritage. Never before have I written a letter. I'm afraid that it is much too long to take your precious time. I can assure you that I would have been much shorter, I assure you that it would have been much shorter if I had been writing from the comfort of my desk. But what else is there to do when you are alone for days in the dull monotony of a narrow jail cell, other than to write long letters? Think strange thoughts and pray long prayers. If I have said anything in this letter, it is that I'm sorry. If I have said anything in this letter that is an understatement of the truth and is indicative of unreasonable impatience, I beg you forgive me. If I have said anything in this letter that is an overstatement of the truth and is indicative of my having a patience that makes me patient with anything less than brotherhood, I beg God to forgive me. Yours for the cause of peace and brotherhood, Martin Luther King, Jr.
I'm doing the same thing. You have to stop.
I'm going to restart the live now and continue. I'll see you on the other side. I'm
See
going
ya.
to take a minute, get a bite to eat. We can all think about that.